Chapter 1. Historical Background and Foundation of Stoicism. 1. History. Stoicism is a Hellenistic, developed by the Hellenistic civilization following Aristotle, philosophy that draws focus to personal ethics based on a system of logic and perception of the natural world. In depth, Stoicism asserts that judgment should not be based on one's speech or words, but rather their actions. This philosophy originated from and was founded by Zeno of Citium from Athens, which today is Cyprus, in 300 BC and was practiced famously by Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, who were its three principal leaders. When Nero turned against Seneca and demanded his suicide, Seneca proceeded to provide solace to his wife and friends. Epictetus, on the other hand, withstood the horrors of slavery and eventually began his school where he taught many brilliant Romans. Marcus Aurelius, who was the Roman emperor, wrote himself notes every day about humility, restraint, and compassion. Socrates was one of the biggest influencers of Stoicism. Like many philosophies, Stoicism is a variation of other philosophies, and Zeno's ideas were obtained from the Cynics. Cynicism was founded by Antisthenes, who was a disciple of Socrates. In its name, a derivative of stoa pokail, the painted torch, was a Stoic's open market, and they would meet to teach and discuss philosophy. Unlike other schools of thought and philosophy, Zeno, its founder, taught Stoicism in public at around the beginning of 301 BC. Stoicism became the most popular and foremost philosophy amongst the educated and elite in Rome, and thrived under the Roman Empire. However, Chrysippus, Zeno's most influential student, is credited for modeling Stoicism as we know it today. Stoicism is divided by scholars into three phases: early Stoa, the middle Stoa, and the late Stoa. 2. Philosophical precursors. Stoicism is a Greek eudaimonic reasoning, which implies that we can anticipate that it will be impacted by its prompt antecedents and counterparts, and also to openly be in basic exchange with both. They incorporate Socratic ways, which have touched base with us mostly early using the dispassionate discourse. The scholarly intuition embraced Platonism, especially during the distrustful stage. The peripatetic school took up Aristotelianism, negativity, wariness, as well as luxury. Significantly, keep minding the end goal that sets a quantitative investigation through placing things in a setting, and the investigation of surviving track records of known rationalists belonging to the antiquated Greco-Roman world. Goulet, 2013. Gauges at the time, the main schools needed diving request: Stoics, 12%, Scholastics, Platonists, 19%, Peripatetic Aristotelians, 6%, and Epicureans, 8%. Eudaimonia implied an existence that warranted living, frequently deciphered these days as satisfaction in the wide sense, or all the more fitting, prosperity. According to Greco-Romans, it frequently included, yet contrary, the magnificence of moral ethics as a major characteristic. Subsequently, the idea is firmly identified with that of upright morals. Brodie and Rowe, 2002, borrowed from the Nicomachean Morals by Aristotle, as there's a broad connection and resuscitation to current circumstances by various rationalists. The best way to comprehend Stoicism with regards to the distinctions among a portion of the schools compared at the time. Taking an instance of Socrates' contention in the Euthydemus, that ethicalness, and specifically the four cardinal excellences of shrewdness, valor, equity, and balance, are the main great. Everything else is neither great nor terrible all by itself. By differentiating, for Aristotle the ethics, of which he recorded an astounding 12, were important, however, not adequate for eudaimonia. One likewise required a specific level of positive merchandise, for example, well-being, riches, training, and even a touch of good looks. At the end of the day, Aristotle explained the fairly commonsensical idea that to prosper in life, it is partly exertion, since an individual is able and should develop character, as well as partly luckiness, as both the social and physical attributes that model a person's life. Complexity, addressing the somewhat extraordinary, at the time notwithstanding, skeptic's opinion, whose imagination was not just prudence being the main great, similar to Socrates, however, that the extra products that Aristotle was stressed over were diversions and should have been decidedly kept away. Diogenes of Sinope was a celebrated skeptic. The celebration of such skeptics' austere and perhaps diverse way of living was encapsulated by Diogenes Laertes in an anecdote about Diogenes of Sinope. One day, watching a youngster drinking out of his hands, he cast away the glass from his wallet with the words, "A tyke has beaten me in modesty of living." The Aristotelian is regarded to be an aristocratic approach. In a scenario where one's life lacks certain privileges, attaining eudaimonia is impossible. When you look at it from a different angle, the Cynics used to live the real form of minimalistic style, which a normal human being cannot practice. The Stoics tried in the past to live a combination of both sides of life, opting to live the twin crucial ideas. They speak of virtue as the only true way to understand eudaimonia irrespective of someone's condition. Education, health, and wealth are preferred or not preferred, just like when you consider ignorance, poverty, and sickness. With that in mind, do not confuse them with valuable things. 3. Arguments with other Hellenistic philosophies. One ought to comprehend the advancement of every single Greek school of theory similar to the consequence of consistent exchange among themselves, a discourse that frequently prompted incomplete modifications of positions inside whichever school, or the changing of an idea from a different school that had been selected according to Gill, 2003. In order to perceive the unraveling of this according to Stoicism, a couple of cases can be considered, identified with the connections amongst both luxury and Stoicism, Platonism, and Aristotelianism, having not overlooked immediately the impact of negativity on the very birth of Stoicism as well as the distance to Epictetus. Truly, Epictetus is unequivocal regarding his negative sentiments about Epicureans, bringing out a cut-out difference as conceivable as comparison of the last worry of joy, torment, and the Stoic concentrate on righteousness and character that possesses honesty. As an example, Talks I.23 is entitled Against Epicurus, which starts, 1. Even Epicurus understands that we are social animals by nature. However, once he has recognized our greatness with the shell, he can't state anything conflicting with that. 2. For he additionally demands, appropriately, that we should not regard or affirm anything that is not agreeable with the great. The Epicureans emphasize that the delight and non-appearance of agony in the body, the shell, is what prompts ataraxia, or peacefulness of brain, a term strangely unique about the one favored by the apatheia, Stoics, or absence of aggravating feelings, as might surface beneath. In a more extended area, II.20 is entitled Against the Epicureans and the Scholastics, toward the start whereby Epictetus challenges the false front, mentally regarding adversaries' hypotheses, that he comprehends quite plainly unreasonable and in spite of sound judgment. 1. Even individuals who deny that announcements can be substantial or impressions clear, that is, the skeptics, are obliged to make utilization of both. You may practically say that nothing demonstrates the legitimacy of an announcement more than discovering somebody compelled to utilize it while in the meantime denying that it is sound. Epictetus does progress to recommend the mix-up in Epicurus, since he educates an existence with respect to resigned peacefulness far from society, but then tries to compose books about it, in this manner exposing himself as worry regarding society's welfare, all things considered. 15. What compelled him to get up and compose the things he composed was, obviously, the most grounded component in an individual, nature, which regardless of the resistance made him her subject. Epictetus spites the conversation, essentially, among the scholastics as he assaults the skeptics, What a tragedy. 28. What's going on with you? You substantiate yourself wrong once a day, and still, you won't surrender these seats without moving endeavors. When you partake, where is your hand taken? To your eye or your mouth? What do you venture into when you bathe? At the point when did you ever mix up your pot for a dish, or your serving spoon for a stick? He perceives the legitimacy in his condemnation, beyond any doubt in Stoic mold, avoiding hypothetical stands, however more of common sense grounds. 35. We could give miscreants reason for defending their conduct. Such contentions could give appearance to abuse state finances. An insubordinate young fellow could be encouraged further to oppose his folks. So what, as indicated by you, is great or terrible, righteous or awful either? All things being equal, not all Stoics dismisses either scholarly or luxurious thoughts out and out. I have said Marcus Aurelius's relative skepticism about fortune versus iotas, however he unmistakably favored the primary alternative in accordance with standard Stoic educating, and Seneca is regularly thoughtful to luxurious perspectives. However, as noted by Gill, 2003, note 58, the lightest of the opponent's school of thoughts would be in harmony with Stoic ones, and this is in the soul of its demonstration. He does state plainly, notwithstanding, having normal inquiries, I don't concur with all the perspectives of our school. 2014, VII.22.1. Cicero, in the third book of De Finibus, gives a few views that differentiate among Aristotelians and Stoics, using his fanciful discourse together with the more youthful Cato. At 41, Cicero expresses, Carneades never stopped to battle that overall purported issue of good and malevolence. There was no contradiction as to actualities between the Stoics and the Peripatetics. However, just as to terms. As far as concerns me, in any case, nothing appears to me more show than that there is to a greater extent a genuine than a verbal distinction of feeling between those savants and these focuses. He proceeds with, the Peripatetic says that every one of the things which under their framework are called merchandise add to joy, while our school does not trust that aggregate bliss includes everything that should have a specific measure of significant worth joined to it, alluding that treating diversely of the outer products among Stoics and Aristotelians. In existence are many archived cases of Stoic conclusions, changing in guide reaction that arises from the different schools having obstacles, taking an example of the determinism position that was adjusted and received by Philopator, 800-140 CE, and a consequence of feedback from the center-Platonist thinkers, as well as the Peripatetic. Likewise, there are crystal examples of Stoic thoughts that different schools are joining, like Antiochus, who presented Stoic ideas as he updated Platonism, advocating the change as he asserted that both Aristotle, as well as Zeno, so far as that is concerned, created thoughts verifiable in Plato according to Gill, 2003. At long last, Christianity was inclusive of Stoicism using center Platonism, at any rate from Alexandria's 150 to 215 CE lineate. 4. The three topoi. Stoicism is founded on two main topoi, logic and physics, but as a result of the Romans choosing to focus on ethics in the imperial period, they became three topoi of Stoicism, logic, physics, and ethics. Logic, according to the Stoics, is the comprehension of the functions of logos or universal reason. Physics, on the other hand, was a topos that focused on metaphysics, theology, and natural sciences. Ethics was the more practical topos focusing on the self and morality. Stoicism as a philosophy is naturalistic, and hence the first two topoi, logic and physics, have a connection with ethics. Stoics refer to metaphysical entities and beings such as God as physical. To understand the correlation between the topos, we shall look at them combined as a garden. The soil would represent physics, logic would be the fence, while the fruits would be the ethics. This is because the physics provides nutrition by way of knowledge, the logic protects the precious within, and the ethics are the actual object and focus of Stoic teachings. Let us look at each of them. Logic. The Stoics relied on a concept that is based on the process of cognition together with morality due to the connection between logic and physics as well as work in service of the ethics. The Stoics then inferred that not all impressions are true and some were cataleptic, leading to comprehension, and others aren't. The difference is, the cataleptic impression stems from something that exists and agrees with the stamped and engraved things that exist. The non-cataleptic stems from something that either does not exist, and if it does, then not in accordance with the existing thing and is unclear and not distinctive. The Stoics conceived that in a scenario of dreams, an individual's perception qualifies for incorrect, but one can be trained to make distinctions between impressions that are cataleptic and those that aren't. However, one should realize that cataleptic impressions cannot be termed as knowledge since knowledge is based on strong impressions that are not altered by reason. Propositional logic. The Stoics' broader approach to logic, however, is characterized as propositional logic, which is accredited to one of Zeno's teachers, Diodorus Cronus. It is centered on statements of proposition instead of terms and made essential differences between payables and assertable. This approach to logics made it fundamentally different to Aristotle's logic. Define for yourself the thing that is presented to you so that you know what it is made of, in its nudity, in its completeness, and identify its name and the element with which it has been created with. You won't find any product that can scan through everything that comes into your life and see at the same time what universe this is, and the use of everything that is in it, and the value of the sum of the parts of the whole. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Physics. Physics, as a Stoic topos, would be a natural science as is referred today, metaphysics and theology. The Stoics sought to live in accordance with nature, which therefore means that we need to understand nature. According to Stoics' perception, everything is real. Everything in existence is corporeal. The universe included, which Stoics viewed as material reasoning substance, they called nature or God. They adapted to a vitalist comprehension of nature, which they divided into two categories, active and passive. The active one acknowledged both fate and reason, which they called logos, while the passive one substance and matter. The universe and its soul are God. God is the same principle operating in reason, with nature and the existence of everything. It is still the essence of the future, fire the principle of life, then the natural elements that transition from one state to the other, like water, air, earth, the sun, moon, stars, and the universe at large. Chrysippus in Cicero, De Natura Deorum. They believe that everything is subjected to the laws of fate. The universe occurs as it pleases. The universe should be taken to be one unit of life, a sole substance, and how everything in the world works in the same energy. All things working together make the world exist as it does. Also observe the progressive structure of the web. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Ethics. As previously mentioned and later expounded on in the next chapter, Roman Stoicism, the Stoics moved to a more practical subject, ethics, as opposed to the first two topoi that were theoretical. The basis of Stoic ethics was borrowed from the Cynics. Its key rule was follow where reason leads. Therefore, it was essential for one to avoid and be free of any passion. passion was their traditional meaning for suffering. This was sought to be achieved through peace of mind, which was a state of having a clear judgment. Plato taught 4 principal virtues: courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice.